Hi everyone, this is Professor Benjamin, and in this week's lecture we're going to be covering migration. Now this could be a different week depending upon what semester course you're taking, whether it's a 10, a 7, a 4-week, etc. But this lecture is going to deal with the migration session. Okay, so a little bit, migration has always been a topic, and a lot of times we talk about migration in relations to immigration and emigration. So you're going to hear a lot of that terminology used throughout this lecture. And in a little bit, we'll dive into the meanings and terms in terms of that. But migration is always, for the most part, due to things that we call push and pull factors. So things that push us somewhere and things that pull us somewhere is typically what happens. And there is both what we call forced migration, so forced push and pull factors, and then there's always voluntary migration, both push and pull factors. So forced migration would be what is going on in Sudan today, right? So individuals, right now there is the Rapid Support Services and the Sudanese armed forces are in a major conflict in Sudan. Many people have been killed, murdered, and a lot of people have been forced to migrate to Chad. And if you're unfamiliar with Africa, these are Central African countries. Chad, there is Lake Chad within Chad. That is the only water source for numerous countries around it. Chad is not a very economically wealthy country. It is a country that suffers from its own issues. And now you have millions of people migrating into Chad forcefully, migrating into Chad to, of course, move away from violence. So there's been almost 500,000 people killed already in this flare-up that is happening in Sudan. Many women have been raped along the process, so there's a lot going on in that region of the world right now. And of course, we here in the United States hear about migration a lot as well. And we also hear about it worldwide. Just over the summer in the year of 2023, there was right while everyone was worried about the submarine that was looking for the Titanic and exploded under the water, there was a migrant ship that sank, and almost 1,000 people probably were killed in that. And they were migrating out of a country, right? So they were trying to immigrate into a new country when this happened. So there's a lot that happens. Now, migration, again, in the United States has been a hot topic forever. 1790 was the first act that it was called the Naturalization Act. Now, while this act didn't deal with immigration itself, it dealt with exclusion of individuals. So it only gave white men rights to vote, to be part of decision making. Okay, now it didn't deal with immigration. People could be brought in through slavery and other means or immigrate to the United States, but it still sets the tone. Okay. In 1882, we had the Chinese Exclusion Act. Okay, we had the Geary Act that kept the Chinese Exclusion Act going. Okay, so we've had a lot along the way. We've also had executive operational acts that have happened, and I know this is definitely a derogatory term, but we actually in 1954 we had the Wetback Act. It was an executive order. Yes. In 1990 we had DACA. And there is a lot. There is a lot that has gone on historically in the United States, and that's why when we talk about migration, it's a hot topic. But as I discussed last week with population, it will be a topic that we will need to cover going forward, and a couple reasons for that is the fact that populations in countries are shrinking, and in some countries are shrinking. Those countries that are in stage 5 or 4 of the demographic transition model, their populations are significantly shrinking, and with this comes the fact that if they want to keep their economy going and the same type of services, they're either going to have to adjust what they currently have in place, or they're going to have to increase their population in some way or another. And immigration is one of those ways. So you'll see here there's a bunch of readings, additional readings. I have a fantastic articles about migration, for example, the Great Migration that happened in the United States. That shaped culture in the United States. So there's explaining the difference between chain migration. So we're going to talk about step migration and chain migration, how the 1965 immigration law changed the face of America. So you'll have a forum post due on that reading. Some semesters you won't, but some semesters you will. Inhumane conditions, of course, at migrant detention centers. This topic, we could spend an entire semester on it. So I just want to walk you briefly through the PowerPoint presentation on migration. Oops, there we go. So let me open the migration. There we go. So let me open this. I have a really great video here from Mr. Sin, of course, my favorite. He talks about 10 different types of migration. So you want to watch this video, and as you're watching this video, you want to take notes on what the 10 types of migration are. And Mr. Sin sometimes gives some examples of reasoning on why that would be. So let's talk about it. So migration is the physical movement of people from one place to another, and this includes both long and short journeys. Immigration, and a lot of times it's permanent, okay? Immigration, movement into a place from another place, is when we immigrate, and a good way to remember this is im means in, and so that into somewhere. Emigration is when you move from one place out of a place, so out into another place. So that's what we call emigration. When we're within a place and we move, so let's say if we're in the United States and we decide to move a short distance within your country, and most of the time this is for economic reasons, there are two types of migration typically. We either call it interregional or intra-regional. So interregional is the permanent movement from one region of a country to another region, and that's why we call it interregional. Intra-regional is when you move with a single region, like you stay within your region, but you just move from one place to another within that same region. So I like to think of these in terms of like internet capabilities. If you work at a company, the internet is the internet that you can go search outside of your company. Sometimes companies have what we call the intranet, which means that you only are within your company working on things. Okay, so that is something. If it's external, it's internet. If it's inside your company, it's intra-regional. So there's some ways to remember that. And I mentioned this earlier, but there's both forced and voluntary migration. Of course, forced migration is leaving against your will, and that's what we would talk about individuals in Chad. When people are forced to leave their country. Slavery is an example of that as well. That's forced migration. Voluntary migration is based on an individual's choice. So I think that the weather is nicer in a specific state, so I'm going to move from my state to another. Or maybe there's a job reason, an economic reason, or maybe my family lives there, right? You don't have to do it. It's not like someone, unfortunately, in the case of Sudan, someone's not coming through your village and burning it or murdering somebody. You're rather making that choice on your own free will. So again, this is that idea that we're talking about in terms of push and pull factors. So push factors or conditions that cause someone to move from a place, and then the pull factors are what causes you to move to that place. And sometimes it can get complicated because sometimes the terms could be for either one of those, so it's really more about the example that you give. Cultural push factors involve slavery, political instability, ethnic cleansing, famine, or war, and people that flee are forced to flee, and typically they're called refugees. And so they are what we consider cultural push factors. Cultural pull factors are, include people who want to live in a democratic society or gender equality, or they want to have educational or religious opportunities. So you can sort of see the difference here. Environmental push factors, and one of the big ones that we need to now address is climate change. So environmental push factors could be climate change. And unfortunately, under the 1951 Refugee Act, climate change refugees are not covered as to be considered a refugee. So this is going to be a big issue. So that if you flee your home because of climate change, you can't be given refugee status. Because under the 1951 Refugee Act, it doesn't consider climate change as one of the reasons to be considered as a refugee. And so this needs to be addressed, right? As we move into this era of climate change, we definitely need to talk about that in terms of that. And then we have environmental pull factors, right? Related to natural disasters, so earthquakes, tsunamis, flash floods. People just don't want to maybe live in those, or they want to live in areas that don't have those items. Refugee is someone who has been forced from their home and cannot return because of their religion, race, nationality, and it's supposed to be protected by this 1951 Refugee Convention, and that is really important, is that, if you're internally displaced, you're an IDP, people displaced within their country, and environmentally displaced people are known as EDP. And here I have on here, but the problem is they're just not protected under that 1951 Refugee Convention. It's going to become a big hot topic in the future because, especially with sea level rise, and last week we talked about population density and how many people live close to water sources. This is going to become a topic in the future. And then the next thing that I want to show you is this idea of global flow of people. And then this is a really cool interactive map that shows you kind of how people have interacted over time. Sorry, let me just, okay. It's a link. It shows you a really good flow of individuals, and you can actually see it from years, how many people, and you can see where people go, and the smaller the line means less people, the larger, or the width of the line indicates that. So you could see here, like, wow, this is really amazing, right? So you could see how different countries have changed over the years and how many more people have migrated, or if that shift had happened. And look at this, that Latin American shift, look how small this line is, that Latin American individuals would migrate to Europe. Do you see that, right? Or Europeans to Latin America, right? And then you could see this. And then look at how wide it gets. And then you can see this huge migrational shift of individuals. And you could see it. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing. And you can actually see here how many people in and how many people out. So in Mexico, in, out, and you could see there, and you can say to yourself, well, why is that happening, right? Why are only a small amount of individuals migrating into or immigrating into, and then why is 2 million people emigrating out of Mexico? Okay, so that is the questions to be asked. In North America, you can see this too. Like we have the United States and Canada, really, but you can see not many people leave Canada. Why? It could be because they have socialized medicine. It could be a lot of other reasons, but you can see here how it breaks it down. It's a really great interactive map that really gives you interesting viewpoints and ideas on immigration, emigration, and you can kind of use those numbers to start asking some critical questions about what's going on in that country and what's causing that immigration and emigration or migration to occur. So hopefully this helped answer some of your questions in terms of migration and give you a little background so that you can work your way through this topic in a more meaningful manner.